It's been said that luck is the intersection of preparation and opportunity. Welcome to the Australian Hunting Backcountry podcast, where we will focus on all things hunting in the backcountry, not just in Australia, but everywhere that backcountry hunting is possible. My name is Tobias, and if you're a hunter with no backpacking experience, or even an expert, I would like you to join me as we explore gear, places, and technologies, hear lived experiences, different perspectives, and share the passion that people have for a hard-earned backpack hunt. I appreciate you being here with me as I try to increase the knowledge that will bring us better luck in the backcountry. The Australian Hunting Backcountry podcast is proud to welcome two new partnerships for 2024. Skeleton Optics Australia and On Track Meals are now both sponsors of the show. Skeleton Optics Australia is a family-run Australian-based business offering premium high-performance and durable sunglasses for active outdoor users. Skeleton Optics sunglasses use polarized Zeiss lenses and feature frames designed with lightweight and impact-resistant materials that provide a secure and comfortable fit. I personally now use Skeleton Optics sunglasses and would encourage you to reach out to Chris and Daniela if you would like further information on what glasses might suit you best. On Track Meals are made in Brisbane and is a 100% Australian and veteran-owned business. On Track Meals pride themselves on producing high-quality, shelf-stable, healthy, real food designed to be taken with you on your next adventure. Because the meals are not dehydrated or freeze-dried, they have retained all the flavour, don't require any water to be added, simply heat and eat, or they can even be eaten cold. They have a broad selection of meals with many more being planned and cater for some allergies and diet options. The coconut ginger chicken is now my new favourite, and On Track Meals will be accompanying me on many future adventures. Welcome to this episode of Australian Hunting Backcountry, and today I'm going to talk to somebody who studies ballistics to get more perspective around the issue that's currently happening in Victoria at the moment with the proposed ban on lead core projectiles. So I would like to welcome Nathan and Steph to the show. Guys, thanks for agreeing to do this, and Steph, thanks for twisting Nathan's arm to come on board.
You're most welcome. No worries.
So you guys are over in Taranaki on the North Island of New Zealand. The South Island is my new favourite place in the world, and I fully intend to move over there one day, or at least live there for 6 months of the year, so I can go hunting for 6 out of 12 months.
Yeah, fair enough too. It's a beautiful, beautiful place.
Yeah. All right. So we've had a few conversations previously to sort of lead us up to here. But we want to sort of cover this topic around monolithic projectiles and why or why not we want those, or the not necessarily why or why not, but perhaps maybe where they fit into deer hunting in Australia. So the topic that I've sort of suggested for you, Nathan, is what role should monolithic projectiles have in hunting? When this came about, there was a lot of reaction on social media. People had posted some videos on YouTube, and I read through the comments and commented on a few, and I had a bit of back and forth banter with some people, and tried to have some sort of discussions and tried to source some sources from where these people were making these claims. And I'm not saying that anyone was wrong or anyone was right, but I was trying to find out where this information was coming from. So in the research that I did subsequent, I came across your website, ballisticstudies.com, and your business terminal ballistics research. And we'll talk a bit more about that sort of towards the end, but I had actually referenced and spoken to you several years ago, Nathan, in regards to a rifle I was thinking about building. But I've also been, over the years, have found my way to your website to look at some of the research that you've done, and there's pages and pages of research. You go into great depth about a lot of different calibers, there's a whole section there, a knowledge base. So essentially then where I landed was a article that you wrote titled "Homogeneous Copper Bullets Can Be Inhumane." So that's kind of the direction that the podcast is going to take, and I guess I sort of want to make it clear that I don't have a particular stance either. I don't think that we should or shouldn't be using. I actually think there's a place for both, but again, it has to be, the use of them has to be scaled appropriately to the situation. Because there is no perfect projectile, there's no perfect caliber, and we just need to, I guess, find our own path in this topic. Unfortunately, the Victorian government is more than likely going to be forcing a hand, and we're all going to end up having to use monolithic projectiles. So, coming back to you guys, Nathan and Steph. Give us a bit of an intro into yourselves and a background of how and why terminal ballistics research came about.
Okay, well, my interest in ballistics started when I was very young. The usual way, going out hunting with my father, but also I had an uncle who his father was a sniper during the Second World War, and the New Zealand Army were interested in having him as a sniper. And he was, watching his skills out hunting was just absolutely incredible. But so that side of it, besides the fascination for hunting, I also developed an interest in more the technical side of it right from the get-go. And so from a young age, I found myself playing with shells and projectiles and studying what they do and so forth, and that absolutely stuck with me. So by the time I left home, I went farming, and that gave me that access to the countryside and to be able to get out hunting at every single opportunity. But again, even in those early stages, I was always interested in accuracy and cartridge performance. And then I began dating Steph. We were only 16, 17 years old at that stage, and Steph would come out with me. And Steph, she found that she couldn't handle anything like a slow kill whatsoever. Of course, she found it to be quite cruel, and that caused me to actually put even more emphasis on, well, what is it that creates a fast kill? And what are we looking for here? So that was kind of the shape of things from the beginning. And then later on in life, when we were able to, I decided that this would be what I put it to Steph. I'd like to actually formalize this and do this as a career. And so with Steph's blessing, then we took our savings and we put our savings into purchasing rifles and cartridges of every configuration, and we set about testing them. So that's kind of how it all started.
But even before you decided that was what you wanted to do, I mean, when we were out hunting from the get-go, when we were kids, Nath was always wanting to if he could retrieve a spent projectile, then he would. And that was always, like it was always this interest of what happened, why did that work, where did that shot go? So,
Yeah.
I mean, all the way from the very beginning of our hunting together, you were dead set on trying to unwind what was actually going on. So
Yeah.
you were researching from all the way through, and I remember talking to his mother, and when he was a little boy, he was devising, like trying to basically reinvent the wheel with mouse traps and and you know what I mean, like it was just this imperative, this idea that he's always been hunting. So
Yep.
it was kind of natural that we'd end up in a business related around hunting.
Yeah.
Yeah. So the long-term result of that was where I was going to write a book. It was basically going to be called something like Hunting Cartridges of the World or something to that effect.
Mm.
But we ended up going around in circles because I would, after the first draft, it was a huge, huge body of work, and it involved hours and just years in the field working, trying to get all this data compiled. And I'd written the first draft, and by the time I got to the end of the draft, my style of writing had changed because I wasn't formally educated in literature,
Mm.
and also, excuse me, some of my beliefs had changed around what I was seeing because I was questioning myself a lot as I went along. So then I went back and I wrote another draft, and as I got so far through that, I started to realize, no, there's still holes in what you're looking at. What you think you're seeing and what you're seeing are two different things, and the style of writing kept changing. So then I went for a third draft of this, and by this stage, a, a man who owned an IT company came along, and this was kind of around what 2008. As internet was really taking off, and he said, well, "How about we put it all up for free? You're going nowhere. We'll put it up for free,
Mm.
and you can make money off advertising or something like that."
Mm.
So we did that, and the advertising was a complete failure. And so that's how we ended up with the knowledge base online for free for everyone without any adverts on it.
Mm-hmm.
And so then after that, I wrote a smaller series of books, and yeah,
So basically, the original encyclopedia that you intended to write is just the knowledge base.
Yep.
yeah.
So yeah,
And then even after all of that, I still find that I'm learning because the knowledge base then that once we had that wider audience, and then I started to make contact with people within the industry, and yeah, I was able to learn a lot from those people. So it never stops,
Mm.
Yeah.
Yeah, I definitely resonate with you there, Nathan, that the learning never stops. Every time you think you know something or think you found the answer to something, something changes, and then you're almost back to ground zero again.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
Mm.
yeah. From hero to zero. That's basically how it goes, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
So, I'm just reading this off your website here. I am now considered a world-leading expert in the field of terminal ballistics and consult with companies and government organisations worldwide. This knowledge base and all of this research and so forth that you've done has gotten you to be able to get to that point where you are being consulted regularly by not only hunters but by policy makers and um, NGOs and that sort of thing around firearm projectile hunting related topics.
Yeah, that's right. I've worked for a UK organisation on behalf of the UN and a counter-terrorism research project. So my job was to supply ballistics data, just to show what small arms wounding actually looks like, and to teach that
Mm.
to the the interested parties. I've also helped with weapons and ammunition selection for European government. I've also consulted with police with various cases around the world.
Mm.
Um, but funnily enough, so I mean, I have done quite a bit of that type of work, but funnily enough, I've never been consulted um, by any government body surrounding the topic of copper, homogeneous copper. Yeah.
Right. Yep. So going back to what you're saying and Steph was saying about this natural curiosity that you had and analysing the bullet performance and so forth. Just take us through some of the, I guess, the boundaries of the testing that you've done. What sort of ranges have you shot at, and how do you do your testing? How do you record your results? That sort of thing.
So for as far as ranges go, Or initially in the old days, I used to test out to about 400 yards or so. That seemed to be enough, but as time went by, I would push ranges further and further until I was testing out past 1,000 yards. But that does depend on the bullet design too. So as I got to understand those projectiles more and what they were capable of, then I would push them further. But as you become aware of their limitations, then of course you know that there's only so far you can push them. And as for but we'd also test in close as well. So you want to test the projectile, how it's going to perform in bush situations, such as hunting a big tough wild boar with a cartilage shield 1.5 inches thick at very close ranges. You want to know how the bullet's going to perform there, but it's good to know also how it's going to perform once all that velocity, the energy's fallen away, and that's all on both lean and large body game, because they're going to produce different results. And as far as the different types of game, well, we have a wide range of game in New Zealand, from goats to, as I said, really tough boar. They're excellent for testing penetration. But also we've got lots of different deer species over here. We've got tahr down on the South Island as well, and they're a really hard target as well. Big boned animal. They're not a huge body weight, but very large bones and a very, very tough hide. Yeah, actually, also there's also the feedback that comes from other people too over the years. That's just been invaluable. And even before we had the website, when we first went in earnest to test in the South Island, there was a home kill butcher in one area, and he offered to take us. He was going to guide us and actually show us the ropes of hunting in the South Island of tahr. But he was such a wonderful person. He knew that you can only collect so much data from one hunt at one time. So what he did was he arranged for the hunters in the area for us to go and visit these people, and he drove us from farmhouse or house to house to meet these people and discuss their findings. So there's an amazing opportunity that was. And for example, there was one house we visited, and he had the big tahr mounted on the wall there, and it had three chest shots with a bullet, actually it was a couple of hunters, and the bullets didn't perform that well. And it was the final shot from the heaviest cartridge that put it down. So as much as you can learn from hunting, so we do have access to a lot of hunting. So it's not just taking an animal. You've got to take multiple shots before you can actually develop an idea of how that's going to go. But also the feedback from other people around the world, just in an everyday manner, has just been amazing. So we probably wouldn't really be able to accurately report without that ongoing feedback,
Yeah, New Zealand is a very game-rich country. You guys are very lucky, and Australia's not that far behind either. In terms of other animals from around the world, what sort of research or data have you been able to collect from those?
Again, mostly the key there is just collecting data from hunters on a week-to-week basis. Like, even if we were to go on a hunt to Africa and I shot 5 animals, well, big deal. You want that. I mean, that's nothing, because you really need to have people collecting their data and with different types of bullets and different shot placement at different ranges, and then I can compare that to my data. And I mean, we've got a lot of large game here, such as we've got wild cattle here, which can compare quite well to larger body weights. But it's only through the situations that people are actually reporting that you can learn from as well. So it's all quite relative, and it's all very useful.
All right. So if we then look at the performance of a projectile, the performance of when I say projectile, I mean a rifle caliber bullet. As I've outlined to you, in Victoria they have a legislated minimum caliber and bullet weight for hunting sambar deer, and that's essentially the majority of people who are going to be affected by this is sambar hunters. So 270 caliber, 130 grain is the minimum. If they do move to banning the lead core, I don't know whether that's going to change or not. There hasn't been I haven't found any information around that possibly being reviewed. So that may be another hurdle that hunters have to overcome later on. But in terms of those sort of projectiles, 270 and up from a rifle caliber, how do they kill an animal? What's the process, the cause and effect that causes an animal to die?
Yeah, it's an important thing to cover because even though I think most hunters have a general understanding of what goes on, there's still some areas where people do get confused, which I can get into in a moment. But primarily, bullets kill through blood loss or damage to the central nervous system, destruction of vital tissues and organs, or septicemia or asphyxiation. So with blood loss, that's your fastest way to produce a kill, as far as having a target that you can easily aim for. So that's when we're aiming for the chest, we're going for blood loss. That's the key. And the lungs tend to be the fastest bleeding organ. The heart, believe it or not, is a slightly slower bleeding organ. And then, so second to that, you have the damage to the central nervous system. That would be like a head shot or a neck shot, something like that. Mm-hmm. That can, of course, cause a quick death, but those targets are a little bit harder to go for. And then destruction of vital tissues and organs, well, that speaks for itself. That would be, so that the organs are no longer working again. So that's your heart, your lungs, liver. A liver is quite actually also relatively fast bleeding organ, but death tends to take around about a minute or so, depending on the type of bullet that's used. And then you've got your septicemia, that would be from gut shots, and asphyxiation as well from drowning from a very slow bleeding lung wound. Well, of those, a septicemia can take up to 2 or 3 days to cause death. Yeah. So with a modern, you were talking about a modern high-power cartridge, it relies on high velocity to begin with. That's the key. So lots of velocity, and then combined with generally with an expanding type projectile. And we use that velocity. So velocity times bullet weight equals kinetic energy. So we use that energy. The projectile actually transfers its kinetic energy to the tissue, and it causes an acceleration of fluid particles around the bullet path. And then this creates an explosive temporary wound, and that subsides to a permanent wound channel. And that permanent wound channel is generally far greater than the diameter of the projectile. That's provided velocity is still relatively high. So but the goal, of course, is always towards fast killing, and the reason we want fast killing is for both compassion for the animal, but also for meat retrieval. So those are the keys. You're always going for that fast kill. So at high speeds with if there's also two sides to the central nervous system as well. If you directly strike the central nervous system, that will cause the animal to go down. But you can also indirectly strike the central nervous system, and that's if you've got a bullet which is traveling really fast and it contains lots of energy, then you can create what's called hydrostatic shock, and that's where the shock wave actually travels along the electrical path, so it can travel up the ribs and to the spine and then shut down the animal. But in that case, it's not actually killing the animal, it's just knocking it out. And then while the animal is unconscious, it bleeds out. So that's actually a term that a lot of people get mixed up on. They mix up hydraulic shock with hydrostatic shock.
Mm-hmm.
So hydraulic shock, by comparison, that of course is just a term for hydraulic force, and so that's really where the projectile is changing its form after impact, and it's sending out those that fluid particles ahead of it, and that's creating a disproportionate caliber wound. So in order to achieve hydraulic shock, you need plenty of velocity, but you also need that bullet changing a lot of its form. And that, so let's say that the projectile expands to, you mentioned 270, so that would expand to around about a half inch, say. But the wound channel will be 2 to 3 inches in diameter, so that's a disproportionate caliber wound. And at high speeds, that's created solely through that hydraulic force, through that bullet hitting at very high speeds, but then changing form so that it can actually transfer that energy. So that's the key. Kinetic energy, it only exists as a potential.
Mm-hmm.
If it's Full Metal Jacket, it'll zip through the animal and it will create a caliber-sized wound. But if you can get that projectile to really change its form, then it produces this hydraulic force. Yeah. So just going back to hydrostatic shock. So the hydrostatic effect, that's something that you can encourage by having a very powerful cartridge, but it's not a reliable mechanism of killing. It's not, you can't kill an animal with that. It's nice in that it does put the animal down and it causes less suffering. But as the range goes out, the ability for a cartridge to produce hydrostatic shock falls away. And also, when you've got large game like Samba, the amount of energy that you would need to generate hydrostatic shock is so high that it's getting up towards the intolerable levels of recoil.
Mm-hmm.
So the only reason why I mentioned hydrostatic shock is just to explain that effect, that if you hit the chest with enough power and the animal drops instantly, it's not an instant kill. Unless it's actually hit the central nervous system, but it can look like an instant kill if the bullet has struck the ribs, sent a shockwave up to the spine and through to the brain. That interrupts those electrical signals. The animal drops unconscious like a boxer that's been KO'd in a fight,
Mm-hmm.
and then while it's down, it bleeds out. But that's something that it's good to encourage, but it's not a mechanism that you can focus all of your attentions on, or build a cartridge around, or a rifle around, or something like that. Hydraulic shock, on the other hand, is something that we do need to be aware of. That is the mechanism for producing a very wide and fast bleeding wound.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah,
Right.
but that also does begin to diminish as range falls away, and so you start to see that as you're getting down towards 2,200 feet per second, the ability for a cartridge to produce hydraulic force is greatly diminished. So down at 2,200 feet per second, in order for that to continue, you need to have two things. One is some kind of weight shedding action, and that weight shedding action, it helps to promote hydraulic force, but it also has what I call mechanical force, and that is just the shearing action of those particles striking flesh. So you end up with a cluster of fragments that reaches out, and that cluster itself ensures that wound remains disproportionate caliber.
Mm.
If, on the other hand, the projectile just mushrooms only, then as you approach 2,200 feet per second, the wound becomes proportionate to caliber, or proportionate to expanded caliber, to be more correct. And then as you start going down below 2,200 feet per second, well, if the bullet is producing quite a narrow wound, and should the hunter not be a really good shot, or that's actually not the right way to say that. Under field conditions, of course, there's always going to be errors. So let's say the hunter, has some error because of his position in the field, or let's say that the rifle itself is only capable of 3 minutes of angle.
Mm-hmm.
Then if he misses or she misses the vitals, if the bullet is only able to produce a proportionate to caliber wound, then that is going to be a very slow kill, and that could be 2 to 3 days before the animal dies. So this is why it is important to have some kind of weight shedding action. And the problem is that for the last so many years, people have been complaining about bullets when they lose weight.
Mm-hmm.
They complain that the bullet has failed. And the 270 is actually a good example of that, because the 130 grain weight, that does fly to pieces, and it's not really that suitable for sambar deer. On the other hand, 150 grain, let's say a partition bullet, that's, it's a bit longer, it's got a little bit more weight behind it. That's able to penetrate, but the 270 is still quite a diminutive caliber relative to large, sambar deer. So that mechanical action of weight shedding of that frontal core of the partition, that actually does help it to produce a relatively large wound, where otherwise it wouldn't, So, yeah.
You're making me start to regret not paying attention in my high school physics class.
Yeah, well, it's also a lot to go over on a podcast. It's a lot easier to do it in writing, because you can actually sit down and explain these things step by step. Yeah.
Yeah. Yep. So coming back to hydraulic and hydrostatic shock, I mean, we've probably all seen the marketing videos out there of ammunition bullet manufacturers shooting into a big lump of ballistic gel and the slow-mo, expansion and then that channel that it sort of burrows through the block and then it all comes down into place. So is that a visualization of hydraulic shock?
Yes, it is. Yeah. Yeah, and of course, I mentioned the temporary wound channel. That's kind of irrelevant. It's possibly useful to scientists who want to study things like what actually happened, but as far as the resulting effect, that's not as relevant as the permanent wound channel thereafter. But yeah, you when you see especially when you see the whole block, sort of the gel block jumping around off the bench and then falling down again, yeah, that's definitely what you're seeing.
Okay. Yeah, because water is very difficult to compress, and bodies are made up of a significant percentage of water, so that
Yeah, that's the key when we start talking about copper shortly. I mean, I would like to get these basics out of the way first, but and that is the point. Water is one of the hardest substances on Earth. It's for all intents and purposes non-compressible. So if you hit it hard and fast, it can't be compressed. It just wants to move out of the way. Yeah, or it moves the item itself. And of course that's what causes that destruction of the projectile. Yeah.
Yep. Those videos and I've got in my notes here, marketing monster. Have you seen the newest Deadpool movie?
No.
No.
It's a bit too violent for me. Sorry.
That's okay. I took my son to see it on the weekend just gone, and there's a villain in it. They have psychic powers basically, so they can read minds and manipulate people and blah blah blah. And there's one of her things is she puts her hand inside people's heads, and sort of they've done the CGI very well that it looks like her fingers are sort of poking out through their nostrils, and the hand turns and so forth, and that's her manipulating their mind. And I thought, what a great visualization of the marketing monsters in ammunition and rifle bullet manufacturing companies and so forth. Those sort of tests that they do, that ballistic gel, slow-mo stuff seems to be, and I know that they're doing it to provide a gauge by providing a constant media in which they fire a projectile into to show the differences. But obviously, a block of gel is not a real representation of an animal, and under hunting conditions, in different angles, and whether it's up or down, or the animal's turned slightly, or all of the variables that go into a hunting scenario.
Yeah, exactly. So ballistic gelatin is only useful as a control medium. So if you've got a projectile that you know how it performs in the field on game,
Mm.
and then you take that known performance and then you put that projectile through a gel block, then you can compare other projectiles to that projectile and maybe gauge how that performs in that medium.
Mm-hmm.
But you're never going to tell how that's going to perform on game until you've tested that. But I remember during or was it the 80s or 70s, when Norma brought out the Vulcan, they tested that on 300 moose, I think it was, and they also did the ballistics gelatin as well. So when they did that, it was all side by side. Yeah,
Mm.
and yeah, I mean things have changed now. You talk about marketing.
Mm.
Before we had these pioneers like John Nosler and so forth, and there was Hornady and Sierra were coming along, and they all they use lead because a lead core bullet, because lead it's a dense material, so it's the only way you're going to get the energy down range is through having that density. But it was also a malleable material. It sways to the bore easily inside of its little gilding jacket.
Mm.
And then when it hits, it transfers the energy because it changes its shape. So these were all known things, and there was a real pioneering spirit.
Mm.
Yeah, and then companies like Sierra, they got a lot of flack for the Game King because this is more in recent years, because the Game King would shed so much weight when it impacted. And they were quite unapologetic about that. They said, well, this is how the bullet actually transfers its energy. So if we don't do this, then your bullet won't actually produce a clean kill.
Mm.
And I think it was pretty hard on them because they were making the bullet, they knew the way it had to be made. And even if people didn't like that, they would continue to do that. They didn't make what the market wanted because they knew that if they did that, um,
It would
then
it would
the
be an
results would be
inferior
poor and people
product.
would complain even more. Yeah, but
Mm.
what they could do is suggest, like, you could use a larger bullet. If the person was having problems with a certain cartridge on a certain animal, you say, well, then maybe it's time you stepped up your cartridge size. But in recent years, it's been a lot harder on companies because of these law changes, and they want to you know keep in the game. Well, they've got to produce the projectiles whether they like it or not if they want to stay in business. So
Mm.
yeah.
So, in terms of the anatomy of a projectile, then, what have you seen are the differences? And I know that you're hesitant to sort of mention brands, but in general terms, what's the anatomy of a projectile look like from your experience for lead versus monolithic?
Well, yeah, as discussed with the lead core bullet, it's just got a very thin gilding jacket, and the manufacturer can control the rate of expansion by thickening or thinning that jacket. So,
Mm.
not all lead core projectiles are the same in that regard,
Mm.
and they can also change the antimony content so that the lead is less or more malleable as well. And then you've got your interlocking mechanisms, whether that's a mechanical lock like the Hornady interlock, or you've got your soldered bonded bullets. Vernon Spear, he was the first to create that, and then others came thereafter. But with a conventional projectile, the lead core projectile, the goal was always to retain around about 50% weight. That was kind of the balance, and that way you knew that you were going to get a good balance of wounding versus penetration.
Mm.
Um, and yeah, so when the copper projectile monolithics came along, they were promoted, and I will mention a brand here that was Barnes. He was promoting the fact that these retain 100% weight, and so he was really using that to push the penetration card at a time when people were complaining about complaining about things they didn't fully understand, and so he really made big inroads there. And it's true that the homogeneous copper projectiles can produce excellent penetration, but he was also talking about less meat damage, which is a bit of an oxymoron because bullets kill through tissue damage. So yeah, there was that, but and then he was using the pushing the eco card as well, and so that's how that got started. But as far as the construction goes, the first construction methods in that regard were for Barnes was impact extrusion. So the trouble with that method is that you're work hardening the projectile as it's going through each step, and depending on the quality of the alloy, as well as the quality of the copper that you're purchasing it, and as well as the steps taken, you can end up with a projectile that is quite hard. It's nowhere near as malleable as lead, of course, but you can also work harden it further, and so you can run into real problems with that. And then after that, we had it must have been around about the same time, I guess, but there are also smaller manufacturers starting to play around with lathe-turned CNC projectiles, and they're really sort of just coming into wider circulation, in the last decade or so, I suppose. But the CNC turned projectiles, they do tend to be a little bit softer, a little bit more malleable on impact. Yeah, but there's another way to design them is to design the projectile so that it does actually shed some weight. And so we have some, or going back a number of years now, there were some CNC lathe-turned projectiles that were designed to shed their petals. But the problems with petal shedding is it's still a relatively low amount of weight lost. And because the reason why I'm talking about this is that, again, once you get down to about 2,200 feet per second, a homogeneous projectile, if it retains 100% weight, it produces a caliber-sized wound. So if you hit, say, in the no man's land on the animal, up above the lungs, between the lungs and the spine, the animal can run off and you might never recover it. But that can happen too if you hit behind the lungs or hit just behind the liver as well, which would of course be a gut shot. With a lead core bullet, that could have actually been an effective clean kill. With a homogeneous copper bullet, that could be a kill which takes 2 or 3 days, to occur. So with these petal shedding designs came along, after the Barnes type bullet, the 100% weight retaining bullet. But those early designs, they had a tendency, well, there's still some around now, they only shed a small amount of weight, so they don't really still don't transfer a lot of energy inside the target. And then just more recently, we've had homogeneous copper CNC lathe-turned designs which can shed up to about 40 to 45% weight. So they are, I wouldn't say available because, they're in circulation, but in Australia and New Zealand in particular, they're not readily available. They are extremely expensive due to the production costs and the costs of the copper itself, but also freight, with fuel costs, going up, and getting this stuff over here has been very expensive. So, it's not without problems. There's no real easy answers. Yeah.
I guess the other thing too to consider is that we are in the infancy stages of monolithic projectiles compared to lead core projectiles. So there's still potentially quite a lot of room for growth, and a legislated change like this, and ones that we've seen in America as well, where California has gone to banning lead. and some other states are potentially following, and there's now programs in other states where they incentivise hunters. They haven't changed legislation, but they're incentivising hunters to change over to copper projectiles, monolithic projectiles. With that is going to drive more R&D by these companies. There's going to be more, development in the industry. There's potential there for a lot more growth. So the monolithic projectiles, like I said, we're still very, very early days with them compared to how long we've had lead core projectiles.
Yeah, for sure. And you're right on the money as far as R&D. I think, though, before, when I talk about people like John Nosler, there was a real passion for hunting. That's where the focus was. And so that they were spending a lot of time hunting and observing and so forth. I'm not sure if the emphasis is the same now with newer companies. I wonder if the emphasis is more on making money, and then the science sort of comes after that. The idea. I mean, I can't state that as a fact. I don't know each person's motivations, but I do wonder, looking at and listening and reading some of the things that these newer companies, they write about their projectiles, and it just leaves me shaking my head. But yeah.
I mean,
sorry,
Steph,
isn't there always going to be some limitation though? Because I was just thinking about weight wise. I mean, copper's always going to be so much lighter. So as
well, that is the problem, because you
I mean, there's only so long that you can make a projectile. And copper's only as dense as it is.
Yeah, and that is the other side of it, is that all these changes are occurring, and the rifles, they require faster twist rates to run copper, but and the magazine lengths are also that can be a limitation. So
yeah,
just wondering, like, in which direction R&D could go. Is it sending them out, even is it trying to get them out faster, or because I mean, you can't make them heavier, you can't keep making them longer, so do you then have to try and keep making them faster? Or
I think that's the direction it's already gone, and where the manufacturers have decided to you can run a lighter projectile, drive it as fast as you possibly can, and it's the only way you go, versus your twist rate and magazine length, and powder space as well. But it's kind of it's run its course, because there's a lot of people who want to be able to use a cartridge across a good range, ridge to ridge, and light and fast is all very well and close, but in order to have energy at a distance, you need weight. And so to get that weight, then the only way people will be able to do that is through faster twist rates, longer magazines. And so
then if you're talking R&D, then you're better off going towards like compressed powder, like different. Okay, we can't use lead. Cool. Okay, so there must be other non-toxic.
Well, powder metal, that's.
Yeah.
So the powder metal is another technology which is slowly coming along, but it also has its limitations in that, again, you're using a lighter material, unless you're actually using tungsten powder, but no one can afford that at the moment. But the core is made up from either tin or copper, and what you can do is you can make the rear core tougher than the front core, so you can use two different types of powder. You can press that heavily, and you've got what is essentially a fragmenting projectile. For a larger body deer, you would need to use again quite a large bullet, so you're still running into your length problems. But there are other things you can do, such as using it like an interlocking mechanism or a breakaway in the projectile, so that you can retain that rear core. But so the makers of compressed powder metal, RWS, they make one, and also they make quite a variety of them, and Nosler, they make them for the varmint loads as well. but it's an infant technology, and generally the projectile weights are quite light, and there's just been no research around large game stuff. Yeah. So one brand I will mention is Cutting Edge. This as far as homogeneous copper. They make projectiles which shed weight, and the projectile itself is of a good weight and has a relatively high BC. But again, you've got this problem of length, twist rate, and then powder compression as well. So you need a suitable rifle, a suitable cartridge, and ideally it'd be good to have some magazine length, unless you want to single feed them. And then on top of all that, you've still got your cost and freight. And then I don't know, in 5 or 10 years what the cost of copper is going to, to be like. But at this point in time, that would be one of the projectiles that, one might recommend.
Welcome to Australian Hunting Backcountry, friends of the podcast segment. Just a quick interruption to this episode for everyone. One of our previous friends of the podcast, Deer School Melbourne, has reached out and offered a special discount for the upcoming September course, which is closing very soon. So if you're listening to this later on in August or in September, you may have missed the opportunity. Reach out to the Deer School as soon as you can to get onto the course. The offer for Australian Hunting Backcountry listeners is a special discount of $150 off for people who mention that they heard this on the Australian Hunting Backcountry podcast or saw it on the AHB page. So for anyone interested, again, Deer School Melbourne, they're on Facebook and Instagram. Their Instagram profile is deerschool_Melbourne. And their Facebook profile is Deer School, all one word. They could also be contacted on 0405 181 522. If you want more information about the curriculum on the courses, go back to episode 12 of the Australian Hunting Backcountry podcast and have a listen to the conversation I have with Nick. Yep. Coming back to NOSLA, you mentioned before the story behind the NOSLA petition, which arguably is probably one of the better hunting projectiles that's ever been created. Was because John Nosler was out hunting moose and lost an animal or had to shoot it multiple times because of poor bullet performance. So that mistake then drove R&D and change, and then we ended up with that. So I guess that's kind of the hope that if we are pushed in this direction, that we are going to see, particularly the bigger companies that do have the money to do this, to really take a deep dive into the performance of monolithic projectiles, and whether that's other materials or construction types, or like you say, lathe turning versus drawing. Yet to be seen, I guess.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah, most of it. There are some smaller companies still coming out. I was talking to the owner of one company, and they get it. They understand. So I mean, the likes of Barnes, I don't think they really understood terminal ballistics in great depth. Mm-hmm. There was a lot of bullshit and bravado, when that company came about. And I mean, again, but as I said before, there are times when you need good, hard, deep penetration. You want a projectile that maintains a lot of weight, and you want it to punch through. On heavy animals, you need that. But a lot of the time, that can be, unless you're really hunting heavy game, that it can actually, especially once velocity falls away, that initial velocity, that can be quite detrimental. So but anyway, there are some people who get it, and they're trying to design these projectiles that will, homogeneous copper projectiles that will behave in a similar manner. but it's really hard to do, and it's the technology, as you said, it's in its infancy. It's not really widespread, and it's quite costly.
So if we are pushed in this direction, let's say in the future we're all forced to use copper projectiles. What are with the current options that are out there? What are the sort of limitations that people need to be aware of if they're going to be using those projectiles? And you sort of already touched on some of them now, in that existing rifles may not have the right twist rate in the barrels, they may not have the right magazine length. The projectiles are longer generally, or the same length projectile is lighter, which then obviously changes your ballistics. There's when in terms of reloading, there can be more tendency towards pressure spikes, so your seating has to be monitored and so forth. Yeah, so in terms of the rifle and the ammunition, we'll get to the animal side of things in a minute. What are some of the things that people need to be aware of for monolithics?
Well, yeah, when you come to monolithic, it pays to up your power level if you can. Also, and this depends on the brand of monolithic, because the hollow point has to be drilled into it. The smaller the caliber, in some cases, the smaller the hollow point is going to end up. Otherwise, it's going to actually interfere with the BC of the projectile. So, yes, you can use a smaller caliber. There's a point you'll reach where the hollow point's so small that once the energy falls away, that projectile may not open up on game. So it pays to not go too small in caliber. And again, this is just depending on the individual mono brand or bullet type. And it pays to have plenty of power behind it so that you can keep the velocity as high as you can for as long as you can. Of course, the downside of that is throat wear. You start wearing your barrels out faster. But that's the way it's going to have to be, I'm afraid. If a person wants to run all types of monos, yeah. But even then, after that initial velocity's fallen away, people are going to have to be very mindful of what those maximum parameters are. So my advice would be to just monitor what's going on inside the carcass. Each time you just shoot a little bit further and a little bit further, and just keep a good look at what's going on, and where that disproportionate to wounding. You got to be able to discern the difference between bruising and wounding. And bruising is just a darker coloured area, say on the lungs, but the actual wound, the actual damaged tissue, you want to keep a good close eye on that and observe it. So if you hit an animal at 2,400 feet per second, you gut that animal, stop and actually look at the lungs, look at the whole lot, and just think about it relative to what size mushroom that projectile would have had to what size wound you've got.
Do you think that if a hunter spends 3 hours looking for his animal, that might be a clue that
Yeah,
it wasn't good wounding?
Yeah, that's a part of it as well.
Yeah. On your hands.
And that is what happened in Europe after the I can't remember which country it was now, but as soon as the bans came into effect, the use of tracking dogs went up because of the amount of wounded animals. Yeah.
One of the other things that they're doing, or proposing, I should say, in Victoria is permitting the use of handheld thermal devices. And you can't help but think that that's a cause and effect situation, that perhaps they've been advised that there may be a higher risk of wounding, and therefore we need to have access to this technology so that we can track animals easier. I'm just conspiracy theorizing here, but
who knows? It's unfortunately with these scientific papers, when they want to prove something, people will prove it one way or another, and they will make the evidence fit, unfortunately, without actually sadly scientific evidence these days is not always, or science, what science considers facts is not always based on hard evidence. So it it can be quite demoralising. But
Yeah.
as you say, we've got to find solutions, ways to move forward.
Yeah. I'll come back to the scientists and their evidence and so forth in a minute. But so in terms of the monolithic projectiles performance on animals, so if I can put a couple of parameters in place. So if we say that I'm happy to state that a significant majority of sambar deer in Victoria are shot at 400 metres or less.
Mm-hmm.
And there are definitely hunters out there who are shooting deer at longer ranges. But I'm going to suggest also that the percentage of hunters that are capable and should be shooting deer at ranges 500, 600, 800 metres is probably in the single digits in terms of percentage wise. So that's hunters who have the equipment, the knowledge, the skill set, and have practiced that art form to be able to confidently and ethically do that.
Yeah.
The old saying, it's often the nut behind the bolt that causes the mistakes. So if we're looking at current rifle platforms, 400 metres and less, is there a place for monolithic projectiles?
Well, I'll give you a good example of that. There's a lady hunter in Victoria. She's an excellent hunter, probably better than most guys, I would think. And so she's running a 308.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason why I say better is because she knows that she's had the odds against her. She's a female. She wants to make it on her own.
Mm-hmm.
And she's got a relatively mild cartridge versus a large animal. And she wants to make it all work. So what she's done is she's set about making sure her rifle's really, really accurate.
Mm-hmm.
She's got her trigger nice. She's put a lot of attention into that. And she's been working on her shooting technique, a lot of practice. And she's got all that going really, really well. So here we've got this person who's put huge amounts of effort into getting her gear as best as she can get it. And that's within her limitations. She's lightly framed. She's strong, but she's lean and lightly framed. Heck, she's doing pull-ups on a pull-up bar. That's actually hard for women with the lateral development.
Mm-hmm.
Anyway, so she's got that set up, and she's worked out that for ethical killing, she can use a mono in close, but for ridge-to-ridge shooting, she does have to use a softer bullet.
Mm-hmm.
So she's got that all figured out. But if she was to use her mono bullet for ridge-to-ridge shooting, that would produce a pinhole wound. Yeah. And so that's, I'm talking inside 400 meters. So, yeah.
Right.
So the 308, I mean, it loses velocity. It doesn't have a lot of velocity to begin with, and then it loses velocity quickly thereafter. So by the time she's out at 400 yards, that's not even meters, most of her loads will be doing about 1,800 feet per second.
Right.
Yeah.
Yep.
So that's well below that. And with monos, the wing really starts to diminish at 2,400. By the time you get to 2,200, you're really, this is for a high weight retaining mono, which is the one that the scientists use in their papers to prove that monos are effective. By the time you get to 2,400, it's really starting to lose its ability to produce a widely disproportionate caliber wound. And then at 2,200, it's really quite narrow. And if they'd paid attention to that, I think in those papers, I saw a lot about how far the animals run. What I didn't see in the Australian paper was much about what the ranges were. And I did notice they were shot using night vision. They were shot at night, so I don't think they were. That's an advantage that they had that this average hunter, let's talk about this young lady here, she doesn't have that advantage. So
I think that with hunters using these mono projectiles, I think that what they have to understand is that they are so incredibly unforgiving, and it's, like that. They can be good, 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 and then there's that very, very fine line, and then they're bad. And
Yep.
I think that really a lot of the limitations are going to be with the hunter himself, because they're so much less forgiving of shot placement, of that little bit of extra range. You might be feeling good on a day and go, I don't normally shoot beyond 300 yards, but it's a beautiful day. That animal's standing clear as a bell. I'll take that shot. That little bit of extra yardage. And with monos, they don't allow that level, that little bit of extra. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah, we have been testing monos a lot lately because of this concern with Australia, but also for me, we're sitting about writing more books. And so there were two things I wanted to do. One, I wanted to make sure that I wasn't being biased, because that's so easy to do. And you're writing, you form an idea about something, and then you stubbornly stick to it and defend it. So I wanted to make sure that I wasn't being biased, and then secondly, I wanted to see what the latest options are doing. What has changed recently. So we've been out there every week testing. Yeah. And it was funny because we came across this. So I had the rifle sight and everything's going really well as far as that side of it goes. The loads are all worked out. And then we saw a mob of pigs out long, and we had to cast those aside because we did just...
You weren't going to do it.
And it was a cull, we had to actually get these animals off this bloody paddock because they were ripping the crap out of it. And if we'd gotten closer, the wind would have eddied on us. And it was a demanding situation, and we had to preserve that land. And those mono bullets, just like, no, can't use those. Go back to your standard load, and away we went.
Maybe that's the key. Is I think hunters have to realise how fortunate they've been with the traditional projectiles, traditional bullets that we've used. They are so forgiving. They really are. And that is, and I think that's the one thing that people are not quite getting with the whole copper bullet debate, is they are so unforgiving. If you don't put the practice in, if you're not
it's checking fouling, the whole lot.
If you don't keep an eye on the quality of your gear, the quality of your own shooting, how do you read your ranges, etc. They can be they're just so unforgiving. So.
Yeah, I think that's probably a common thing that I've heard in other podcasts that I've listened to about this topic as well, is that the lead projectile really has the advantage where if you have a peripheral hit, so something that's on the outside border of your target area, you're still a lot more likely to achieve a successful humane kill than you would be with a monolithic.
Well, you'll at least get a blood trail. I mean, the number of times.
Yeah, with copper, you'll get the penetration, but someone's blood trail is actually.
I mean, there's been a few animals that I've shot with a copper bullet, and there's just no trace, and you know that it was a good shot. But, trying to find that blood trail is very difficult.
Yeah. The problem is, too, you could say, well, the hunters need to be a better shot, but it doesn't sort of allow for the realities of hunting, where the wind can cause errors, or the rifle accuracy limitations of a factory rifle, or just the average guy just trying to do their best. There's so many clients I've had, they want to improve when they've come in, and they've just been sort of fumbling along trying to do the best that they can, and they've even sought advice here, there, and it, but it's it's actually good. It's hard to work it out. It takes time. I mean, that's why we do these things. They're a challenge. We set about doing them. We want to improve. Animal steps forward during the shot. That's another one that can muck up your shot. So yes, a lot of mistakes happen, and you've got to have some allowances for that. They are definitely more forgiving.
Yeah. But you certainly raised an interesting perspective there as well about how a lead ban might affect the other hunters, the females and juniors, because obviously they're more recoil sensitive than generally than larger bodied beings like men.
Yeah.
And I like big calibers. I've shot a lot of big calibers, but it's also nice to to shoot my 6.5 or my 257 Roberts every now and then, because you don't get smacked around and that recoil blast and all the rest of it. So yeah, is this ban potentially going to be discriminating against those people, that sector of the hunting community?
Yeah, well, it can do in a way. With the If you drive lead slowly, it yeah it can still deliver a great deal of energy and produce a very large wound at low speeds. So, and which makes it ideal for running youth loads or for anyone that's recoil sensitive.
Mm.
But yeah, I mean, and then of course on the other side of this too, we've got to look at, well, where's the poisoning as well? Like, did they test Australian hunters versus non-hunters to see what their blood levels were, and or urine testing, whatever. Where is the evidence, the data for that?
Yeah,
The other side of
so that's the next question, I guess, that I've got, is that if there is this evidence that suggests that lead is toxic to us, to hunting dogs, and to the peripheral animals, the raptors and the scavengers and predators, do we not, as hunters, as conservationists, as part of our ethos, do we not have a duty to change over to non-lead projectiles?
Yeah, well, again, it, I mean, we know that lead is toxic. Lead poisoning is a thing, but also, I mean, with there's an American CDC paper from a long time back where they tested the lead of hunters versus the lead of other citizens, non-hunting citizens, and found that there was no difference whatsoever. Because there's so much legacy lead and background lead from other sources, so it can be actually hard. And it's the same with the American condor as well. In California, they blame the hunters for that, but then they found the towers where the lead paint was used on those towers. It's a legacy, legacy contamination. That the condors were picking it up from those towers, and so since they've had the lead bans in California, as far as I'm aware, it hasn't significantly changed the lead levels in those condors.
Yeah.
So then you say, well, yeah.
Sorry, I was just going to say, I think you actually said that there were photographs or videos of the condors actually picking the lead chips off those.
Right. Yeah. So some of that was covered by a Dr. Ron Saber, his name is, and he was trying to create some kind of a pushback against these bans because he felt that they were entirely political, in order to start strangling ammunition supply, which with the rising price of copper and so forth with the electronic industry moving forward, that could be a thing. But as far as poisoning goes, well, the funny thing is, there are so many contaminants in our environment now, and yet it's funny how the government decides which
contaminant you worry about.
Yeah, which one we worry about. For instance, we know that aluminium, it can cause immune disorders. It can cause Alzheimer's in the elderly. It causes all sorts of damage and destruction to the body, and yet that one is considered, that's okay. It's okay to be in your food additives and deodorants and vaccines and so forth. Yet it can cause horrendous life-changing consequences. But we're supposed to, just be okay with that. And versus lead, well, we know that lead is toxic, but now, it's being vilified out of all proportions. And it's amazing how some hunters have been contacting me absolutely terrified of using lead. There's this fear. And what's interesting is that if you were to try and detox the body, well, interestingly enough, lead leaves the body very quickly. if you're using a chelating agent such as EDTA, these days you can get EDTA in pill form. There's other things like pectosol as well. If you're using some kind of chelating agent, well, lead binds to chelating agents very readily, and it flushes from the system. And that's why when you're doing a urine test for heavy metals, when they do that urine test, they'll push with a chemical, with a chelating chemical, to actually get it to move from the body.
Mm.
And so when you're reading the results for that, that will show that you'll see high levels of lead, whereas you'll see low levels of aluminium. Now, they might still be above the reference range, beyond what's considered acceptable, but it won't look as high as lead. And the reason why it doesn't look as high as lead is because the lead actually moves, it transports out of the body quite quickly and readily. It's higher up, it's atomic, a number on the periodic table. It will actually have that affinity, whereas aluminium, that's actually a lot harder to shift from the body. So there's these these contradictions here, because yes, lead is toxic, but if we take, well, first, lead from bullets is not easily metabolized by the body. So if you do, if it does go into your system, you'll move it out of your system pretty quickly. It's not the same as constant exposure to some other bloody sulfate or something, or lead. But if you do have it in your system, you can, if you need to, remove it from your system quickly. Yet on the other hand, these so-called approved metals, such as, these approved levels such as aluminum, they don't shift from your system, and they're hard to detect. And when you do get a urine reading, it may be a false reading. It may, even though it's just like slightly elevated, it might be because it's not shifting from your system. And so there's a lot there to unravel. So I really don't like the way scientists or government will pick on this one small group of people, these hunters, when there's these huge elephants in the room, like glyphosate and so forth. There's just so much out there. Uranium and imported fertilizers is a big one. Cadmium, and this is in the phosphate fertilizers. All these things. No, we won't address that. We just address the hunters over here. So who knows?
I also think that lead is something that humanity's lived with for a long, long time. And our population seem to keep growing regardless of this lead that we've all been around our whole lives. And I tend to think about areas I look at Europe. There's this idea that lead gets in the environment and it becomes highly toxic and it destroys the ecosystem. Well, then, after the Second World War, given the amount of ordnance that were dumped on the countryside, Europe should be dead. You know what I mean? Like, it should just, how many tons of lead were dropped during this World War?
Yeah.
So how did anything survive that? That must all still be in that land, in that farmland, in that, do you know what I mean? I just, it's become so vilified, and people just buy into this vilification of something, and they seem to just stop thinking rationally and going, well, hang on, haven't we always been around lead? Lead pipes were the absolute norm, and I'm not suggesting that we should have lead pipes, but
well, that's where the Flint, Michigan crisis too. There's a lot of people that were affected by lead poisoning there, and that's from constant everyday exposure.
Yes, and that's a really bad idea. But what I'm trying to say is that over the years, as industrialization has happened, lead has been a very normal part of our environment.
Yeah, we still use it in wheel weights and so forth. It's still something.
Yeah, I'm just not quite sure if the level of vilification that it's getting for environmental
reasons,
problems is quite accurate.
I think that's sort of I think that's when I've looked at this evidence, and initially, you read the studies of the raptors in America, the bald eagles and the vultures and so forth, and even the Australian studies with wedge-tail eagles. When you look at that on its face, you could be you couldn't be blamed for thinking, oh shit, lead is bad. We probably should be doing something about this. But we're looking at literally a snapshot in history. So you're right there, Steph. Where's the baseline here? Where's the testing that was done years ago to say this hunter now has elevated lead levels, and we can directly trace that back to him eating shot meat using lead-based projectiles?
Or you could do that through linotype operators as well.
Yeah.
You know?
And where's the analysis of this wedge-tail eagle that we've measured the lead in their system, and we can directly attribute that to them scavenging on deer carcasses in the Alpine National Park that have lead core projectiles and so forth. So there is no perspective, there's no background. It doesn't seem to be from the reading that I've done, and please correct me if I'm wrong here, but evidence can kind of be skewed here a little bit to serve a purpose. And scientists work by forming a hypothesis and then going out to try and prove that hypothesis. And a lot of time that theory is based in their own belief systems and their own opinion, or led by a particular subject that may be at the forefront of the media or a political issue at the time.
Yeah, that's right. That's how it's been. And if you want to make an impact, you have something to do with the environment, and you certainly get funding for that these days. It's the way things have gone.
Yeah. I mean, research scientists all want to, well, not all, but I guess their objective is to go out and do some research so that they can then publish a paper, have it peer reviewed, and then be a published scientist, and then that generates more research grant money for them, government contracts, all of that sort of thing. And I'm not saying people shouldn't be out there trying to make money or make a living, but you can't help but feel that maybe there's a bias slung in one direction because of a potential political issue.
Yeah. I think for hunters, I think it's good if they can try and get the facts straight in their own heads to begin with, and the facts around how bullets kill, that's a big one, and actually understanding. I know you said it's like we're talking about physics here, and you forget your high school physics. Don't worry about that too much. That's what I would say to guys. But there are some basic things like weight times speed equals kinetic energy. But kinetic energy only exists as a potential, and that energy has to be transferred. And so we know that. Okay, so that just transferred through a change in form. But then if you start losing that speed, then you start losing that kinetic energy. So you need either more of a change of form, or you need to completely transfer the energy into the target via having that break up and cause what I call mechanical wounding or a mechanical action.
Mm-hmm.
And then so from that you go into the field and start looking for this, and instead of then you must change your expectations as well. So if you go into it, and this is like you're talking about with scientists, with they've got a preconceived idea of the outcome that they want, and that can create false bias. Well, it's the same with ourselves. So instead of complaining about a bullet shedding weight, I know it can be frustrating if you hit a big animal and it runs off, and you think that it's because the bullet blew up. That's the old saying. Well, if you can just study to see, well, could I have used more bullet weight, or just really have a look at what's going on, like where that change in form and weight shedding does actually help with wounding. Don't just create blanket statements that if a bullet sheds weight, that's bad, because then you're missing a whole piece of the picture. Actually start thinking about how much bullet weight one might be needed to actually get the job done, because bullet weight and bullet construction are two significant factors. Neither are mutually exclusive. And then yes, there are times when it's good to have really, really high weight retention in a bullet, but be aware that does also have its limitations once velocity starts to fall away. And a good example of that would be Woodley. Woodley have had great success with the African cartridges because the bullet does shed a little bit of weight, and African cartridges are usually only going about 22 to 2400 feet per second. I think about 2400 feet per second will be the average, and some African hunters would consider it the magic number because the bullet's not going too fast, so it's not stressing the bullet on impact, but it's not going too slow, so you're still generating a fairly good-sized wound. But actually, in my experience, it is actually quite, by the time the bullet reaches the target, on average, it's going to be doing about 2200 feet per second, which is slow. You're talking 30 speeds. And the reason why these bullets work well is because they do shed some weight. So even on that the big African game, those Woodley bullets are shedding about 25% weight. So that's how they're working. So try to keep that in mind as you're going forward, because and shift if you can, or even just let go of those expectations of how bullets should perform, and actually just see how it is performing, and then you start adjusting, what you need to actually make things work from there, and that can just open yourself up to learning.
And it's always the case when you have a failure, when you lose an animal, like Steph said, you're on your hands and knees for 3 hours trying to look for spots of blood to track an animal and end up having to give up. We then fill that information void with assumptions, and we always look to point the finger of blame at something, and usually it's never our fault, is it? It wasn't anything to do with me as a hunter or my accuracy or ability. It's always something else. And so and I'm saying this because some of the comments that I read on some of the social media posts were people saying that they had used a certain type of projectile and had lost that animal, and so therefore they blamed the projectile. But without that dead animal there in front of you to be able to perform the necropsy on, it then becomes impossible to actually know where the fault lies, and it might have been a cluster of
that's right.
factors.
A good example would be a comment I heard from a hunter, and that was he thought that the 300 blackout would be better than the 308 because when the bullet hits, it's going slower, so it can do more damage while it's inside the animal. So this is the kind of myths and so forth that we perpetuate, and then but on the other side of it, and we briefly touched on this before, and that is you get there's been a few people in the States, and they've shot stumps of wood with Barnes type bullets, or homogeneous copper bullets, and the bullets haven't opened up, and then they've gone online and they've made a comment, I can't get this bullet to open up, and people have really jumped on the poster and said how stupid they are, because the homogeneous copper bullet needs water to cause it to open up. Well, then you got to ask, well, who's stupid? Because in saying that, all they're saying is that it needs a super hard, non-compressible substance, which is one step away from a diamond, in order to get that projectile to expand. So really, is the guy who was just shooting, I know a tree stump's really not a good test medium, but do you really have to run that guy into the ground for actually making that observation when there might be something to it? So, but as you say, observation is the key, because often people will blame something on bullet blow up or so forth, or that the bullets just passed through and done nothing. Well, until you've got it on the ground, and you can, it's hard too if it's dark and it's wet and cold or something. You want to just get your butchering over and done with. You just want to get on with things, but it does pay to just get the carcass, get the animal first, and then look where the entrance was, where the exit was, and then set about gutting it, and then lay the lungs and liver all that up beside it. Just stop for a minute, and if you can, take a few photos, and so that you can remember all of that, and then later on you can start sort of piecing all that together.
So coming back to the evidence in air quotes, we see on on the government. And when I say the government, I'm not necessarily referring to a particular politician or whatever, but the people that are responsible for making legislation changes and so forth.
Yeah.
So we'll see on certain government websites X-rays, for example, of animals that have been shot with a lead core and a monolithic projectile, and we have these very pretty pictures that illustrate the point about fragmentation and again trying to sort of push you in the direction of the advantage of monolithic as opposed to lead core. And then we read studies about bone scanning of dead raptors and the content there. What do you see are the advantages or disadvantages? I'm not trying to get you to say something here, but what do you see perhaps as being problematic with that evidence being presented in that format?
Well, with an X-ray, of course, that is quite an emotive means of delivering information, because they don't skin or gut the animal. They will generally use like a varmint style projectile, traveling really, really fast with a really light bullet. So it meets a huge amount of resistance on impact because it's such a light, fast bullet. It breaks up completely. And then they make no effort to skin or gut the animal. So yeah, it's going to look like a mess. But further to that, it also a lot of the fragments that are seen in the X-ray are actually copper jacket fragments. A more realistic, X-ray would be if the animal had been cleaned up, the way a hunter would clean it up before he's going to take it home for tucker.
Yeah, that's a good point, because obviously an X-ray is a one-dimensional image, so it doesn't show the depth of those fragments.
No.
So yeah, are they actually in parts of the meat that we would consume normally, or are they in other areas where we're not likely to touch or feed to the dogs or that sort of thing?
Yeah, that's right. And I mean, also they could have, one approach could have been, if they were that concerned, would have been to actually have some kind of social pressure on hunters to please bury bloodshot meat. It's a really simple way to get people on board. It still allows people their freedom of choice. It that could have worked all around. It might have required a bit of time, but I think everyone would have really gotten on board with that. But these days, it just seems to be, blanket bans, control, and that sort of carry on. And I guess I understand why governments do it, because they were concerned that that there's always that element that will, never, that won't actually do the right thing. So then it's best to just ban things. But it's a shame that.
But they still won't then.
Yeah, well, that's true too.
What was that? Sorry, Steph?
Yeah, it's like asking gang members to hand over their guns. It's never going to happen.
Yeah. Can you hand over those illegal guns, because we're going to make them really illegal?
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah.
So, that's quite true too. Yeah. Goodness.
And in Australia, the difference between Australia and the US is that a lot of states in the US have full meat recovery, if not full carcass recovery. So some places it's a requirement that you have to carry the whole animal out that you've just tagged. So in Australia, obviously we don't have that. Hunters take the meat, the cuts that they want, and then the rest is left there. And I guess that's where they're sort of deriving this evidence that the wedge-tailed eagles are then feeding on these carcasses and obtaining the lead poisoning from. But I guess the real punch below the belt is that there is a lot of aerial culling going on in Victoria on public land that hunters have access to. and those carcasses are not being recovered. They're being left there to rot.
Yeah.
And they are using lead core projectiles, and the proposal is, I believe, that they will be given an exemption to continue their culling operations using lead core projectiles.
Oh, wow. Okay. That's, yeah.
So not really worried about the animals then.
Yeah.
Kind of contradicts their argument, doesn't it?
Yeah.
It does. Yeah, it really does.
Mm.
Gosh, that's a shame. It's bad business.
Mm.
Mm.
You know, I remember reading articles about the deer cullers in New Zealand, and they would come in and carry out the whole animal underneath. You know, you'd see a string of them underneath a helicopter, getting carried out so that they could, recover and utilise the meat.
Yeah.
So maybe
They were shot with most of them were shot with the 222 neck shot.
triple two or 22-250 headshot. Yeah. So maybe if the government had said something like that, or maybe this is something that we should be pushing for as a hunting community in Australia, to say, well, you're kind of contradicting yourself here, and the hypocrisy is a little bit hard to swallow. I don't know. That's just a thought from my side of it.
Yeah.
And I guess that also contributes to the emotion that everybody has expressed around this topic. In that, we're being forced to do something, but the rules are different for somebody who's contracting for the government.
Yeah. It's hard times all around.
I think that's across the board, though, isn't it? That double standard that seems to exist at the moment.
Oh, absolutely.
Do as I say and not as I do.
Yeah, that's right. You guys have got to sacrifice while we don't.
Yeah.
I mean, they're still dropping 1080 baits through the national park as well. If they're really worried about environment and animals being affected by potential poisoning, why are we still dropping such a harmful poison in public?
Why are we poisoning?
Yeah. And New Zealand's no different as well. I know they're doing that over there.
It's interesting. We actually were friends with an entomologist. This is going back, nearly 20 years now.
Yeah.
And he was contracted by DOC, which is the Department of Conservation over here.
Mm-hmm.
And his job was to do an entomological study to see the effects of 1080 on the insect life after it had been dropped.
Mm.
And what he discovered was that it gets, because of course the big argument with 1080 is that it only gets eaten by specific target species, and everything else is perfectly safe.
Mm-hmm.
And this guy found that actually that was not true. It got right down into the soil, and it was affecting, and it did kill the insect populations. And anyway, his study was never released. He was then basically told to shut up, and that was the end of that.
Yeah. He was Epsteined.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, that's about it.
Yeah.
And look, again, I might be conspiracy theorising here, but if the government controls the ammunition, then effectively they control firearms to a degree as well. And if all of a sudden certain calibers become irrelevant, unusable, because in Victoria, if you have cited that hunting is a reason for you to hold a firearm license, and all of a sudden you have firearms that you can't use because you can't get copper projectiles or copper ammunition for them. You know where this is going. Like it's.
Well, that was a concern in California. That a governor had said this right from the beginning. If we can't control the guns, at least we can control the ammunition.
There you
And
go.
it was after that that the lead bans came into effect. But if you fast forward that to another, let's say, 5 to 10 years from now, and let's think about some sort of 16 to 18-year-old who wants to, maybe get into hunting and get his license. Well, a box of ammo at $200 a pop. Where's he going to find the money for that? So, 20 rounds at $200. I mean, we're already getting up to over $100 over here now. So, yeah.
Not to mention the fact that copper is so important to the the electronics industry, and and of course it's becoming, mineral rights. The mining
consents
are also being shut down for environmental reasons. And I mean, at the end of the day, if it comes down to who gets the copper, is it going to be government
or the electronics industry?
Not just the electronics, but also the armies, or is it going to be civilian hunters? Well, it's going to be the army, isn't it? And it's going to be the electronics industry. So if there's only a finite amount of copper available, then hunters aren't going to get it. So
and this,
it's quite short. It's very, this whole defending of solid copper bullets is actually very short-sighted, I think, as well.
This Ukraine-Russia conflict is a great example of that, for the powder shortage.
Yes,
because it's all being produced and shipped straight over there. It's not coming out into the domestic market anymore.
That's right. Yeah, here ADI has got huge contracts to supply to the US, which of course then goes on to the Ukraine, and again hunters are left with bugger all.
I guess ideally, again, I'll say that I don't have a for or against personally here. I do use monolithic projectiles, and I do also use lead core projectiles, and both with the intention of using both to hunt deer and also in Victoria. I don't live in Victoria, but I do hunt there as often as I can. So in my mind, I guess I would have probably preferred and supported the government coming on board and saying, hey, look, this is what we're really concerned about, and these are the reasons why. Here's the evidence. We're going to put it out there, make it accessible for you guys. Even if they'd said, here's a training module that you're going to have to do to maintain your hunting license for Victoria, about educating you around lead poisoning and so forth. And then we're going to leave it up to you to make up your own mind as to what you're going to do. And if you want to switch over to monolithic, obviously we'll support you. If you don't, then that's your choice. And then maintain, some sort of research and study going on and so forth in the background, so that we could, in years to come to a point where they can actually provide us with a good body of evidence to say, this is the data that we've accumulated, and these are our findings. And then as a result of that, we're going to, make these changes or recommend these changes.
Yeah.
But again, it's sort of, like I said before, they've kind of got this snapshot and gone, oh, this looks really bad. So we're going to now make a change because, whatever the reasons are behind it, like we've said, there may be ulterior motives behind it. But on the face of it, it looks like this is what we're basing it on because of this lead poisoning and so forth. So we're now going to make this change. And there's been no build up to that, and no actual real study into providing evidence to convince people that this is justified. Obviously,
yeah. Well, I mean, think about how many animals were shot after the Second World War when the guys came. Well, after both the First World War and the Second World War. And the men came home, they had rifles, game were abundant. And the tallies, the levels of animals shot in New Zealand and Australia in those years was just so high. Pigs, kangaroos, over here, deer. And yet these your wedge-tailed eagle's still there, and now all of a sudden he's in danger. Well, okay, yeah,
Yep. I think historically, my memory of governments is that they make up their mind that they're going to do something and make a change and legislate, and they're going to legislate for it, and then they throw out a public forum, and this is what's happened in Victoria. They've opened this subject up for public comment, but at the end of the day, they've already made up their mind. They know what they're going to do, and they're just going to force it through and get what they want. But they kind of do this public consultation process to give us the impression that we've had an opportunity to have a say and have an argument and that sort of thing. And then when the change comes in, we go, oh, well, at least they gave us a chance,
Yeah.
So I can't help but feel that regardless of what we say and the evidence that we put forward, for or against this, the government is still going to move in the direction that they want to move. So yeah, when that happens, I guess maybe I'll have to reach out to you again and have a different conversation about what changes people need to look at making in terms of their hunting style or rifle.
Well, it is tough because at the moment, people are looking towards efficiency as well, as you see with the powder shortages.
Mm.
And then here's me talking about, using more speed, more power to try and make the most of this stuff. And those two don't go together that well. But yeah, maybe we can have that conversation again one day, and hopefully, we're talking about the technology being in its infancy still. I know that a lot of copper manufacturers wouldn't agree with that, but I don't think they should presume that they could do in just a few years what other manufacturers took 50, 60 years to do. But anyway.
Yeah. I mean, the technology and machinery and even knowledge base now is far further ahead than what it was 40 or 50 years ago. So there's definitely room for growth there still.
Yeah, I think the one of the trouble with it in the old days, people were good at observing, but what they didn't have was the words to articulate what they were seeing. And I was no different either. A lot of gun writers of the day and people who were working in those companies, they just came from grassroots types of upbringings and lives, and so they could witness and observe something, and they could develop a good understanding of it, but they couldn't really articulate that, and so that's why we ended up with words like hydrostatic shock, which is a bit of a concoction of words that was Roy Weatherby. He coined it, and then people really attacked him for that. But actually, you think it's good enough. Like if you pull the word apart and study it, and you think, okay, that's good enough. That'll do. But now we have the technology. That's true, and we have all these advantages. But what we seem to be lacking is the ability to actually observe and understand things for ourselves. That's kind of gone away. Critical thinking. It's gone.
And I think a lot of that is because there is so much pressure on the internet. A gentleman can hunt an animal, see a result, and go, okay, I think this happened. And he only has to be on the internet for half an hour to feel like he has no idea what actually happened, regardless of what he saw, because there's so many people going, oh, what actually happened was this.
Yeah, but the other problem is too is that you can go onto the internet with the most ridiculous, stupid idea, and you'll find a million people who agree with you and validate it immediately. And then, okay, I'm going to start up a bullet company. Boom, just like that.
Well, I was thinking about these big copper bullet manufacturers, and it's really interesting how they've kind of turned things on its head, because it used to be a a businessman would see a market for something, right? Like a need, like you see a need, and so you create it and you fill that.
Mm.
But what's actually happened in this case is that the company has created the need, and now the market is filling it. Do you know, like it's a real reversal,
Yeah.
rather than creating something that people needed, instead they've created something and then told the people that they need what they've
That's right.
created,
Yeah. It's the
Yeah,
modern way.
yeah,
which is so different.
yep, yep.
Mm.
And I think that sort of ties in with what you said before, Nathan, about things being financially motivated, where companies may find a way to produce something that's very cheap to produce, but then they can market it as though, like you say, Steph, everybody needs this because of these reasons here,
Yeah.
and huge amount of markup and so forth, and then there's a you know there's an explosion
Yeah.
and so
That's
forth.
right.
And again, I take nothing away from people trying to make money, but like I said, the marketing monster that puts their hand inside your head and manipulates
Yes.
the thought process, and maybe overpowers the rational side of the brain.
Yeah.
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 That's so true.
Mm. Look, like I said, this is a very emotive topic, and I've certainly tried to have some some conversations with people, to find out what they're basing their things on, and because what I guess I saw a lot of was people just basically slamming their fist on the desk and saying, this is unfair, and therefore we shouldn't do it, when in actual fact they haven't sort of had an opportunity to step away from that emotion and analyze it and see whether this is actually a good thing or not, and weigh up what's being told to us, and going out and doing their own research. So my concern is that this is really going to kind of split the hunting community, and dividivism is not what we want and not what we need as a hunting community. So that's my concern, is that we're going to be pitted against each other with the civil war of the lead core versus the monolithic over here, and
Yeah.
and that's what governments want. They want to divide and conquer, basically. So I think what I'm coming back to is that there is a place. I think we can agree that there is a place for monolithics in deer hunting in Victoria. But it's because, and I say this because I think it's an inevitability that we're going to be pushed into doing this, and that hunters are going to have to learn where this new projectile fits into the scheme of their hunting, and how that looks for them in terms of perhaps changing the style of hunting that they do, or other modifications and so forth. And again, how this is going to be policed, we don't know. Spotlighting in the Alpine National Park is illegal, yet you can go down there, almost any day of the week, and certainly over the weekends, and you'll see the electric dog getting flashed around.
Yeah.
So and I'm not saying that because I want to encourage people to break the law. I'm just saying that,
How is this going to be done? How is it going to be achieved? That's right.
Does this mean that the government is then going to pour more money into staffing this problem to be policed, and officers hiding behind trees and jumping out and doing random inspections on hunters walking through the national park and that sort of thing? Like, we're sort of, I know I'm going down a rabbit hole here, but I'm just, I guess I come back to that point that I don't want this to divide us, that if we are going to have our arm twisted here, that we're going to have to still remain as a solid unit. And
Yeah, well,
hunting for
yeah,
opportunity.
well, on that note, when copper bullets first hit the scene, I was really, really keen for them,
mhm,
and the reason was because um, I was hunting large deer in the bush, and I really wanted to have a bullet that would take an animal from any angle, sort of thing.
mm,
I developed these ideas around the need for cartridge power and penetration, all that. And I actually, so this is when I was researching, but I was still very young, and I thought that when I just thought that the projectiles needed to be better, and that why are they losing so much weight and all this sort of carry on. Anyway, when copper finally hit the market, I was really, really excited about it. I thought this was going to fix all sorts of problems, and it'd have this bullet that could punch through from any angle and take animals of all different sizes. Well, after I got going with it, well, the first problem was fouling and poor accuracy.
mhm,
Um, so that was a major issue, and then sort of managed to work around that. And then we had the coated bullets; they came out for a while, and then we had the banded bullets. But as I went along, and I started noticing that diminished wounding performance at lower velocities, um, and in some cases just poor performance because of the particular method or the copper that was used. Then I realized these things had serious limitations. So the reason why I mention it is because I was all for copper
mm,
myself,
mm,
and I thought it was going to be great. So I don't think it's a case of being on one side of the fence or other either. I think, as you say, if people can actually work together and say, well, this type of bullet has strengths here,
mm,
but it's not going to do everything. Well, that's fair enough. That's fine. What's wrong with it? It's like knives. If you have a big heavy knife,
mm,
you can't do. You try chopping carrots with it; it just
mm,
blows chunks. But
mm.
you can't even cut bread with it. So you have different tools for different jobs, no matter what we're doing.
Yeah.
So it's the same goes here. So yeah, copper bullets. I still like using them for heavy animals. They can be great,
Mm,
but I'm infinitely aware that the problems that can occur at lower velocities, that can be
mm,
a
mm.
real issue. So
Yeah. Look,
yeah,
I years ago, I same thing. I was excited about using Barnes in my 270 and hand loaded some 140 grain. And back then they didn't have the tipped, so it was just the TSX. It was one above the X, the first
yeah,
model that they came out, because that obviously had a lot of the issues with it. So they'd
yeah.
they'd come out with the TSX, and yeah, same thing. Very excited to use it. This was gonna be a game changer for me. Got good accuracy out of them. And then one of the first deer I ever shot, almost lost it. And if it wasn't for the fact that I was hunting with a mate at the time who was using Corlocks, I probably would have lost it. Um, and what had happened was I'd hit him in that no man's zone that you're talking about, right through the muscle between the under the spinal cord,
Yeah.
and you could have pushed a knitting needle through the bullet hole.
Wow.
But so then for me, I was like, okay, well, I'm never using monolithics again. They're a complete and utter failure. I'm done with them.
Yeah.
Eventually, I've sort of come back. It's come back full circle for me, where I'm experimenting with another brand of monolithics at the moment, and I've struggled to get an accuracy that I wanted from them.
Yeah.
So I was literally at the point of going back to lead core projectiles. But I've been able to sort of, I found a what I think is a good acceptable sweet spot with them. So I'm happy to experiment and so forth. And so far the animals that I've shot with them have all been good results.
And that's that's the other side of it. If you're hand loading, you can muck around with that. But if you're a
Mm,
factory ammo user, and if the hand loading was to get banned in the future, well, that really starts to muck things up. But if
yeah.
you're a factory ammo user, you've got to just stick with whatever you've got.
Mm,
So that it's not so good.
yeah. Yep. Yeah, and unfortunately in Australia we don't see a lot of the products that are actually available. Because we are such a small market share over here. I think I spoke to somebody once who was. This was when I was in America years ago, and I forget which company they were working with, but it was one of the sort of distribution type companies that handled a lot of different brands and so forth. And
Yeah,
I said to him, well, why do you not send these over to Australia? And he said, I'll be honest, he said, because you guys are less than 2% of our market share.
yeah,
And
yeah. There you go.
if I tried to convince my bosses that I could increase their profit rate by 1.8% by doing all this work, they'd tell me not to worry about it.
Yeah,
So,
and
having said that, however, I do want to highlight that it is not impossible to get things into Australia, to import them. I've been successful in importing these projectiles. They are produced in the US. I've also had some cases imported as well. So with the right paperwork and a bit of patience, you can do it. So if anybody out there listening is interested to know more, please reach out to me because I'll quite happily walk you through it.
oh, very good.
All right, so I'm mindful of the time, guys, and I really appreciate it. And I'm sure that we could sit here talking guns and ballistics and so forth all day, but I want to talk about something a little bit more enjoyable. So one of the things that I several years ago, Nathan, that we connected with, it was your 7mm practical.
Yeah.
So this is a bit of a baby of yours. So tell us about that and what's on offer there, or potentially on offer there for people who are interested.
Well, I designed the 7mm practical around 2011, and with a few modifications going on from there. And it's based on the 300 Winchester Magnum neck down to 7mm. So the case is a bit longer than the 7mm Remington Magnum.
Mm-hmm.
And the reason that came about was because I had been using the 7mm Rum for a while, and I was really enjoying its long range performance.
Mm-hmm.
But I was burning through barrels too quickly, and so I had to sort of try and work out, well, where is the maximum power level for the 7mm bore? How much powder can you actually put through it before you start getting into massive overbore problems? So the 300 Winchester Magnum case seemed to be about right. So yeah, we got that going, and it's been a huge success. Manson Reamers, they produce the Reamers for it these days, and it's actually been so popular that they've been producing it in batch runs. I
Right.
don't know if that's still the case now with the 7mm PRC on the market,
Mm.
but interestingly, I was expecting the PRC would kill its popularity, but the PRC is a little less powerful, although that does make it a bit easier for certain types of match work and things like that.
Mm.
A bit longer barrel life, but yeah, the PRC wasn't as powerful, and also the twist rate Hornady suggests they can make it quite finicky
Mm.
regarding accuracy. So yeah, the practical seems to be going really, really well. Of course, it does have its limitations. It's a good medium game cartridge, but you wouldn't want to put it onto really large animals. You start asking too much of it.
Mm.
But yeah, we've had a lot of fun with it over the years. That's for real. Yeah.
Mm. Mm. Do you build your own rifles? Do you do your own gunsmithing and so forth? Because you experiment with a
Yeah.
lot of
So
different.
we over the years we've done a lot of gun work and also tutorial work.
Mm.
So I was guiding for a number of years, and then and that was advertised on the website, and then that changed to tutorials when I found that people really, as I got more into the research of cartridges, I also found that I really wanted to educate the guys that were coming rather than just take them out hunting, because I was seeing so many problems with the kit guys were bringing along.
Mm.
So rather than just poo-pooing my clients and going, oh, why did the guy bring this rubbish, I actually turned it into tutorial type hunts. And then as time went by, they became, the tutorials went more towards long range as well. So, yeah. And then, of course, there's the book sets that people read to go with that. But then, in recent years, especially since the lockdowns, I've backed off a lot of that, and I educate people through the books, so they can find that out there. And I really do encourage people to just work through the books and do that themselves. But for us, at the moment, I mean, we're still running the occasional tutorial and still doing a little bit of gun work, but the biggest thing at the moment is just to try and keep up with the research and writing, and it's so time consuming. I can't be everywhere at once. So we're just doing the best that we can, and trying to make it all work out,
Yeah. Well, look, like I said, the 7mm practical certainly piqued my interest years ago, and I think I was even able to track down a gunsmith in Australia that had a reamer for it at the time.
Okay.
So I did come close to building one, but in the end, I kind of the only reason I shied away from it or didn't go with one was I kind of wanted a one gun to do as much as I could, and that was mainly due to financial restrictions at the time. I'd love to have a gun safe full of different calibers, for each animal that I want to hunt, but because the biggest animal that I was hunting was water buffalo in Australia, and North American game like elk, I decided that I needed something a bit bigger. So
that's right. It's just not suitable for that kind of carry on.
But no, certainly sort of like I said, I took a shine to it, and I think we emailed back and forth a few times, and did a lot of reading on it. And I mean, just in general as well, I've also found myself coming back to your website over the years, multiple times, because you do have that knowledge base there. So anytime I had a curiosity about a particular caliber, or you'd Google something and you'd come up in the search results, I'd find myself back on your website again anyway. So
good. I'm glad it's been useful. The main thing is, I know that people want click here and subscribe to this and that sort of carry on, but the purpose of it is it's got to be practical and useful. That's our main concern. We make our money from some book sales. That's great, but otherwise it's just about doing the right thing and helping each other along. It's got to count for something, no point just having a bunch of waffle up there. So I'm glad. It does seem to have helped a lot of people out over the years. It's been wonderful. Yeah.
Well, look, I'm gonna wrap this up. Like I said, otherwise we would be talking guns and hunting all day. And it's now, you guys are 2 hours, so it's now getting close to lunchtime for you two as well.
Yeah, it certainly is.
So ballisticstudies.com is the website. There's, like I said, there's a whole knowledge base there. There's articles. There's a particularly entertaining article you just put up recently about tactical tomfoolery. I'd encourage people to go and have a look. I won't spoil it for people, but let's just say it relates to a recent firearm related event in the US. So that was entertaining in itself. I can't thank you enough again for making this happen and giving me your time. And Steph, again, thank you for twisting his arm or twisting his ear for whatever you had to do to get him to come on board.
You're most welcome. It's been great talking to you, Tobias. I really enjoyed it.
Yeah, I have too, mate. And like I said, no doubt we'll probably touch base again in the future and stay in contact. And I definitely plan on getting back over to New Zealand again. So either I'll make the effort to come up to the North Island and come and see you, or maybe you're down the South Island at the same time I am, and we can cross paths.
It sounds wonderful, Tobias.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
We are in a pretty attractive area of Taranaki, aren't we?
Yeah, we're really lucky here. Yeah.
Hey, thank you for listening in. If you'd like to contact me for a chat, pass on any feedback, or have some ideas for future podcasts, please reach out to me on Instagram at australian_hunting_backcountry or email australian.hunting.backcountry@outlook.com.au. For now though, please look after yourselves and your mates.